Will ultra-processed foods make you fat? Let me explain. Okay, the short answer to that question is yes. That was a short video. I probably should elaborate on that, shouldn't I? But seriously, why is it that you can eat an apple and feel relatively full, but then you can demolish an entire family bag of crisps and still feel hungry? Well, today I'm going to explain to you why ultra-processed foods hijack your hunger systems and why switching to a whole food diet can actually help you lose weight without even having to count a single calorie. And hopefully by the end of this video you'll realize that overeating isn't actually a willpower failure, it's a design feature, and that will make sense shortly. So we should probably discuss what actually is an ultra-processed food. Now, there's a classification called the NOVA classification, which I'll put here and you can have a look through that. It's a little bit disputed, but it's a useful tool. And category 4 is the ultra-processed foods. So those are things where things have been extracted from food and then other things have been added back into them to make the final product. But these shouldn't be confused with processed foods, because lots of things are processed, and when you think about processed foods, think about things like breads with minimal ingredients, things like tinned beans. So those are not quite exactly how they would be in nature, and they've maybe had a few bits and pieces added to them, but to all intents and purposes they're still food. Ultra-processed foods can be thought of more as industrially manufactured food-like substances. And think of things like sweets, biscuits, cakes, fizzy drinks, ready meals, things like that. Those don't resemble real food at all. And a reasonable rule of thumb for trying to figure out is this ultra-processed or not is if your grandparents or your great-grandparents wouldn't recognize it, then it's probably ultra-processed. At least that's a reasonable way to go about trying to figure out, is this ultra-processed or not? So why is it that ultra-processed foods cause such a problem with weight? Well, it's not simply just about calories. If the body was only interested in calories, then ultra-processed foods wouldn't really have any influence on our weight at all. We would eat the calories that we needed and we would stop. But humans don't eat calories. Humans eat food signals. And that's where ultra-processed foods begin to hijack systems that cause us to eat more than we need. Ultra-processed foods are designed to be easy to swallow, easy to chew, soft, and fast to eat. And all of that combined is what leads to part of the problem. So what this means is that your brain hasn't had a chance to register that you've been eating, and that's often why you still feel hungry afterwards and you want to have some more. So why is it that you're still hungry after you've eaten ultra-processed foods? Well, if you compare it with whole foods, they contain a lot of fibre, and that fibre stretches out your stomach, which begins to tell your brain you're filling up. They often will contain a lot of protein, and protein takes quite a long time to digest, and it also increases the satiety hormones in your bloodstream, which tell your brain you're filling up. And there's a lot of chewing goes on with whole foods. So chewing takes time, and that stretches out the period between when you start eating and when your brain tells you you're full. If you compare that with ultra-processed foods, well, those are usually low in fibre, they're often low in protein, and they're consumed extremely quickly. So they do not tell your brain you're full, and that leads to overeating. And what you're getting in that situation is high calories, low levels of fullness, and I could eat more syndrome. Or as we would say in Scotland, I could go that again. Sorry. Oh, I had to put that one in, didn't I? So let's talk about calorie density. Calorie density is, I guess you would define it as the number of calories per gram of a food. And if you compare an apple and a chocolate bar, well, they're roughly the same size and weight. So you might expect they would have the same calories, but clearly they do not. The apple is mostly water, it has high levels of fibre, and it takes a while to eat. It also has quite low energy. Now compare that to the chocolate bar, which has high numbers of calories. It's basically dry food, and you can eat it really rapidly. So it's basically a form of concentrated energy. And it's no wonder that when people do things like Arctic expeditions, they don't take barrels and barrels of apples with them. They take tons of chocolate. Now, I've mentioned that ultra-processed foods can be eaten really quickly. What is the problem with that? Well, they're eating faster than your biology can handle, because it takes about 20 minutes for the brain to start releasing satiety signals and say, that's it, had enough, stop eating. And when you eat ultra-processed foods, well, as I said, those can be eaten really quickly with very little effort. And that leads to a kind of mindless eating where you're not actually paying attention to what's being consumed, but also the rest of your body isn't paying attention either. It's sort of flying under the radar, and then you, as I say, overshoot and overeat. Now, at this point, we do need to talk about a slightly uncomfortable truth, and that is that ultra-processed foods are engineered to override some of your body's handbrakes and encourage eating by hijacking these reward pathways. And they all really act around a thing called dopamine. Dopamine is your reward hormone. It's released in a whole variety of situations, but predominantly it's there to improve your memory of something. So you will remember that this thing is good, therefore I should have more of it. And it's involved with habit formation. Ultra-processed foods often have various combinations of high fat, high salt, high sugar, a variety of textures, flavor bursts, things like that. And those are all designed to get your dopamine flowing and make you consume more of them. I mean, as an example, there's a crisp, I guess you could call it a crisp, but there's an ultra-processed food that once you pop, you can't stop. Will I get into trouble for saying that? That's their catchphrase, I suppose. But that has been designed to fit onto your tongue, to give maximum flavour to your brain so that you will eat more of them. They're not that shape just because they fit in the tube better. They're that shape on purpose. And so once you understand how dopamine works and how these foods interact with dopamine, you might understand why you reach for the bag of sweets when you're stressed. You maybe eat them when you're not hungry, and why you overeat them. Because when someone gets stressed, they don't exactly reach for a handful of broccoli, do they? They go for the ultra-processed foods because those release dopamine. Dopamine makes us feel good and makes us want more of it. Now, we do have to talk about insulin here. I know I've been going on about type 2 diabetes in recent videos and pre-diabetes and things like that, but ultra-processed foods often contain a lot of sugar, and sugars in very simple forms. When you eat ultra-processed foods, those sugar spikes shoot up, and as a result, your body has to release insulin in high quantities to bring that back down. And that can lead to big sugar crashes, which means you end up exhausted. So if you're eating a diet of ultra-processed foods, you'll often find that an hour or so after you've had them, you feel knackered and you think, oh, I'm having a sugar crash, I better have more. And that's not really what's going on. What's going on is you're pushing up your insulin levels to the point where they are staying high after the sugar has normalized, and then the sugar begins to go down a bit further. And because you've got high insulin and normal to low sugar, your brain says, well, I've got all this insulin, better give me some more sugar. And the cycle repeats. So that might help you understand why a diet of ultra-processed foods will lead to snacking, will lead to craving, and will also lead to fat storage, which is being promoted by high levels of insulin. And that cycle just goes up and down, and continues. It's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, unfortunately. If you compare that to whole foods, they basically have the opposite effect. They slow down digestion. They flatten out blood sugar and insulin spikes. But as you've probably realized, if you have an ultra-processed diet, overeating is basically inevitable. And putting that all together, you're going to end up with low satiety, high calorie foods, rapid eating, and wild blood sugar swings and insulin swings to compensate. And that means that ultra-processed foods don't just allow overeating, they actively encourage it. But is there any good news here? Well, yes. And that is, That you don't need to count calories, you don't need to have guilt around what you're eating, and you also don't need willpower. What you need is to shift the default. And what I mean by that is, instead of your default food being ultra processed, shift it towards whole foods. And that makes all the difference. Your appetite will automatically become self-regulating. Your blood sugars will begin to even out. Your portions will naturally shrink. It's a much more sustainable way to keep weight off. So focusing on the food quality will beat a diet hands down every single time. Now, it might be fun if you put a comment below about what is your absolute go-to ultra-processed food and why you find it so hard to resist. It'd be interesting to see what others write as well, because there are lots of them out there, and I could tell you mine, which is, oh yeah, I might as well tell you. It's these cheese and onion flavour crisps from Tesco. It's the crunch, it's the crunchiness and the saltiness. I don't know, I can't get enough of them, and I have about I can't think of any other vices I've got left, but that's one of them. What a perfect place to film this video about whole foods. That is whole food. That's what the farmer is growing, and that's what you should be eating, not the stuff that doesn't look anything like that. As I said to a patient once, when they told me that they thought they were being healthy by having bran flakes for breakfast, I said, there's no such thing as a bran flake tree. And when I talk about whole foods, that's kind of what I'm meaning. You should recognize it as food. So that is ultra processed foods and why they probably cause weight gain explained. I hope you like that video. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.